Welcome to the Teach Joyfully podcast, where we talk about all things elementary teaching with some mom stuff thrown in. I'm Lisa Burns, a teacher success coach, veteran elementary teacher, and mom of 5. I'll be your host. Thanks for joining me today. None of us start the school year hoping it's going to be a challenging or terrible school year. No, that would be completely crazy. All teachers start the year with hope and great intentions, right? We just do. We're naturally, well, at least I hope, optimistic. But somewhere along the way, things can start to unravel, and some years more than others, right? So we need to figure out not only where things begin to fall apart so we can prevent that from happening, we also need to figure out how to set ourselves up for success as much as we can. And the best way to do that is to begin by defining what a well-run classroom looks like, what a great class community feels like, and what the day-to-day of an organized teacher life looks like. And that piece is something that we can do today. Essentially, what we're trying to do is we want to figure out what makes for a great infrastructure or foundation for all of these great things that we want to happen in our school year. If we don't have a vision and we don't know where we're headed, then for sure we're not going to get there. We might get partially there, but we're not going to get all the way there. So we want to give ourselves the best chance at success for ourselves and for our students' sake. So let's start with, what does a well-run classroom look like? Now that might be slightly different for all of us because we teach different things, we're in different school communities, and we have different personalities, right? Everybody has a different noise level tolerance, everyone has a different level of tolerance for how often kids are moving around the classroom. We're all just that little bit different, and we need to be comfortable with what we're allowing in order for it to be a well-run classroom for us. So let's start with what's okay with you. What does it look like? If you can stop for a minute and just visualize how you want your classroom to function. Think about who you are and think about, what does that classroom need to look like? Start at the beginning of the day. How do you want students to enter the classroom? What does that look like? Do you need them to immediately get their things put away? Do you want talking, no talking? Is that realistic? And you need to think about, what is realistic. Telling kids that they can't talk at all when they just walk in the door first thing in the morning is probably not realistic. So maybe you need to think about voice level and what interactions are okay with you and what's not okay. Are they being productive, getting things put away? What are they going to do once their things are put away and they're going to sit down? What's the first thing that you want them to do? You need to define those things in advance so that you can train your students right away and everything can run smoothly once you get your students trained. But if they don't know what to do, if you're not very explicit about what is okay and what they should be doing, then it's not going to happen. They need to not only have you explain it, but they need to practice it, practice it, practice it. Once everyone's busy, they're in the door, they're doing whatever it is that you've set out for them to do, whatever your normal is going to be, and all those tasks are done and you're going to gather as a class and get busy. What does that look like? What does that transition look like? Here's the thing. We plan all the activities and we do, honestly, a pretty darn good job about that, right? But the transitions, sometimes we forget about that. And that's where things can really go awry. So we want to make sure that we plan the transitions. How do you get from one activity to the next? How do you get from one area of the classroom to the next? How do you go from individual work to a group time? All of those things are transitions, and those transitions are essential to have them mapped out in order for you to have a well-run classroom. Everyone needs to know exactly what to do and how to do it. So think about that transition. What will it look like and what comes next? Once you do that, write it down. Write down each one of these steps and be specific. You can really write down more and more detail as you get into it, but right now just write it down. And then What's next? What happens next in your day? You need to have a schedule. You need to know what it is that you're going to be doing and how you're going to be doing that. If you're going to do it differently the first week of school or the first couple of weeks of school and then add in more things later on, that's fine. Plan out how you're going to start and let the kids know that there'll be some new things you'll add in as time goes on, but you don't need to define them or talk about them at that time. Just worry about those first couple of weeks then. Get that mapped out. So as you're going through your day, mentally walk through each particular area of your day. So if you're moving into language arts and you're doing whole group language arts instruction, how are you doing that? Are students seated in their desk? Are they on the carpet in front of you? How are you going to manage that? Your students need all the sensory information. What does it sound like? What is that going to look like? What is that transition like? How are you going to get students to mentally and physically transition well? Sometimes the transition is literally just mental, other than maybe putting a folder away. If that's the case, sometimes it's good to have something very quick, funny, silly, whatever it is, to help everyone mentally transition. It can be a joke. It can be stand up and stretch. It can be anything that you want it to be, but having something that you actually physically do can help a lot of kids who struggle with transition to make those transitions. It can also help us. Think of it like a dog. You know, when I play with my big dog and we're done playing, she kind of shakes it off and just does this big old shake, and then she can move on and go do whatever it is she was going to go do, lay down, go chew on a toy, whatever it is. But she can make the transition. Usually we do a double clap and she knows that we're done throwing the ball for her and it's time to go do something else. That's her signal. So what is it that you're going to help your students with to make the transition? And you can use the same transitions throughout your whole day. You can use different transitions between different subjects, whatever it is, but plan that out. As you make those transitions and you move into other activities, how are students to behave in each and every activity? Map that out. What are your expectations? Do they raise their hand? Do they put a thumbs up in front of their chest? Do they hold up one finger, or is it two fingers? What is it? What is it when students are going to answer and you want some sort of an answer from them? You need to train them in what that expectation is. Every teacher is different and they need to know in order to be able to accomplish what your expectation is. This calms a lot of fears for a lot of students because if they have very clear parameters of what the expectation is, then they can relax because they know what's expected of them and they won't stick out like a sore thumb. Nobody wants to be the kid who has no clue. They don't. They don't want to be singled out as, oh my gosh, we all know to do this, but you don't know that. These are things that they want to know, and it relieves a lot of fear and stress and anxiety for students if they know exactly what the expectation is. So be clear. It's a gift to your students if you are clear. Once you have that, then go through each moment of your day. What will lunch look like? What will recess look like? What are the expectations? Write them down. You need a flow chart or you need a list. You need something to actually know what your expectation is. And quite honestly, it's really nice to have that on your first couple of weeks so that you're consistent in what you're telling students and you're consistent in how you're training your students. Because let's face it, there's a lot of things that happen throughout the day, and it's even easy for us to forget what it was that we defined as what we want our normal to be. And so in order for us to be consistent, sometimes we need that list or we need that flow chart for ourselves the first couple of weeks so that we can be consistent. You can even tell your students, I have a very specific way I want everything to be done, but if I tell you something different than I told you yesterday, I need you to call me out on that because we want to be very clear and I might forget. I always tell my kids, I'm old and sometimes I forget things. So you got to remind me about what it was that I said so we can all know exactly what the expectation is. They love it. It breaks the ice. It really is something kids like to help out. They like to help teachers remember what things were because they like catching you in an error. Quite honestly, they do. Once you get all those transitions in, you get lunch in, you get that time coming back in from lunch or recess, what will that look like? How will you shake that off? How will you let problems go? All of those things, you need to plan for that. Because if you don't have a plan for that, when problems crop up and things start going wrong, for sure, you won't handle it consistently. So have a plan. What will that look like? And the last thing that you need to do is you need to plan how you're going to wrap up your day. Now, you've probably heard me talk about this a million times before and you're rolling your eyes, but I end my day with a 10-minute tidy because I think we all need to be held accountable for cleaning up the messes in the classroom. It creates a sense of community, it helps us learn to work together, and it wraps things up so that you're not faced with a big old mess that somebody else made at the end of the day when the kids are all gone. So take time for whatever it is, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, or 10 minutes, whatever it is that works for you, but make it consistent. If you honestly think throughout the year that you're really only going to be able to give it 2 minutes, then make it a 2-minute tidy. If you think you can pretty consistently do a 10-minute tidy, with a few exceptions, go for 10. Try it out, and you can adjust. If really your class is great at it and they only need 2 minutes, make that adjustment. But start the way you mean to go on, knowing you can make some small adjustments, but you're not going to make an adjustment to the fact that everyone has to help clean up, because that is essential. It gives them pride in their classroom, makes them a team, and it gives you that clean classroom that you need so that you can move on. Now remember, in my 10-minute tidy, students are cleaning up all the stuff around the classroom while the teacher is cleaning up all of the lesson plans, the papers turned in, all the things that have been out and about, and all of your stuff so that you're organized too. So you're cleaning off your teacher desk, putting things away. You're cleaning your space just like they're cleaning theirs. So everybody has that good basis and they can jump right in the next day. The last piece is, what is your plan for getting students where they need to go? You need some sort of an organized list for where every student is going. I like to organize it by different areas. Kids who are walkers, kids who are going to the bus, kids who are going to daycare, all of those things. I like to organize it by groups, but I also have some extra spaces in each section because sometimes you need to draw a line across some student's name and they're going home a different way, and you can write that in and have it ready before the end of the day so that you're not scrambling trying to remember that Mary is not going to be walking today, that she's going home with Aisha. And that's okay, but you just need to have room for that so you can make those adjustments because those things are going to happen. So that makes things so much easier. So be ready with that. And then you won't be scrambling and you'll know exactly where every student goes. And students who can't remember, you'll be prepared because there's always that kid who can't remember. All right. So with that done, and that's not a small task, I know, but with that done, you're going to feel so much better. Honestly, I think this kind of stuff is more important than decorating your classroom. That classroom decoration is really lovely and nice, but these systems are essential. And so if you can have this, you can always work on decorating your classroom in the first weeks of school. Trust me. But you cannot go back and get your system set up once that marathon of a school year begins. You can make adjustments and tweaks, but I promise you it's not going to go well if you don't already have this set up in advance. So the next step is talking about how can you make your classroom a better community. Creating community has a lot to do with words and traditions. So thinking about things that you always do, things you say, how do you speak to students who are misbehaving? All of those things are important. How do you talk to kids when they've done a great job? What kind of words are you going to use? It sounds so simple, but it actually is much harder than you think. Our words have so much weight, and if we don't know what we're going to say and how we're going to say it ahead of time, it's really easy to say things that maybe aren't all that helpful and sometimes make the problems worse. If you want a little more help with this, I actually have an episode that talks about this very clearly. I'll link that in the show notes. So for me, when students are not meeting expectations, I have very specific things that I say, and I develop them into what I call a power phrase. It's a phrase that I say with little to no emotion, and it comes out every time. I have not only written it down and planned it, but I practiced it in the mirror over and over again until it is automatic. So I literally don't have to think about it. It just comes out, and you have time to do that now. So get it done. I actually have a power phrase worksheet that I will link in the show notes. I have another episode on how to plan your words, and I will link that in the show notes as well. Okay. So once you've done that, now you're ready. You've got some words prepared. That doesn't mean you're prepared for every situation, but you're prepared for a lot. And that power phrase is a phrase that will buy you time so you can take a minute and process and then go back and deal with the problem. Instead of jumping in, unless it's an emergency, you don't want to jump in and just start saying things because you will live to regret them at some point during your school year. Okay. Now, I know I talk a lot about self-care, but self-care is really important, not just for you, but for your students. So not only do we need to be caring for ourselves, and yes, there's lots of things you're going to do outside of school, like getting enough rest and having some downtime and all of those things. But when we're in school and things become stressful or heated or any of those things, we need to teach ourselves, one, how we're going to deal with that and get ourselves calmed down so we're in a good space to be able to deal with it. But also, we need to teach our students how to do the same. Self-care, when you're feeling stressed or anxious or angry, is really essential. And there's things that we can do and our students can do in order to calm ourselves down. So having a place where students can go to get calmed down, whether it's going to visit the nurse or you have a little corner where they can go and just sit down and take a breath, but you need to teach them what to do while they're there. It's not just go sit there and sulk. It's, okay, here's some breathing exercises. Here's some clench and release kinds of things. We tense and release. Practicing those things as a class over and over and over again. And so students can actually pull from those resources when they are stressed or angry or upset. It has to be a habit. If we haven't practiced, there's no way they'll be able to pull on those resources. But if we can teach them how to pull on those resources, we're teaching them how to care for themselves. And we need to talk to them about that. This is how we practice self-care. This is how we get our control of ourselves and quit letting other people decide what our emotions should be. So that's another piece. That's the beginning of teaching better community. The other piece is planning your words helps with that community, and then talking to students about how we speak to each other. How do we interact with each other? How do we encourage each other? And really working on that, giving students opportunities to practice that in the first few weeks of school helps to make that a habit as well. How we speak holds great weight. And I'm telling you, if you can learn to speak in very clear, direct ways that are positive and affirming, but also very direct when you need to make corrections, but loving and caring at the same time, it's like a miracle. And you can do it. Your students can do it, but you need to model it first because they're going to take your lead. If you're not doing it, it is not going to happen. So make sure you're taking care of how you are behaving first and how you're speaking first, and then teach students to do the same. And that is something we just train and talk about all year long. That also means that when students don't do that, when they speak in ways that are disrespectful, you need to have a response to that. You need to plan, how are you going to respond to that while still being in that great classroom community character? How are you going to respond to them in a way that lets them know that's not okay while still not tearing them apart? And so you need to plan those pieces as well. And I'll put some resources for that in the show notes for you as well. I just think that that is such an important piece. And if we can plan that, it makes all the difference in the world. Another way that we create a classroom community is to have traditions. Traditions bond us as families. Traditions bond our class together. You need shared experiences and we need traditions. Now, shared experiences are going to take some time, right? You have shared jokes. It's going to take some time. That just comes as you're going along. But looking for opportunities and keeping our brain open to those opportunities and remembering them helps our students bond together. Oh, you remember when that happened? Oh, that was so funny. This can happen around your curriculum, especially language arts, talking about characters. Oh my gosh, when you talk about books and characters and events, these are ways that we can bond. We can bond over the curriculum, bond over our struggles, bond over things we thought were so funny, and we can make connections to our everyday classroom life as well. So being open to those possibilities and trying to look for them and remember them and then draw back on them, that helps build connection and community. Everyone wants to be known and to be understood and to be part of something. Well, create something that kids can be part of. They can be part of an inside joke. They can be part of a shared memory. Those are things you can be a part of, but also plan throughout the year traditions. Maybe you have a tradition of something that you do every Friday. Maybe you can create a routine about something fun you do every Monday morning to set up the week for success and get everybody laughing. Whatever that is, if you have something that you regularly do that's fun and engaging, students will bond over that. They'll remember that and you can say, oh, wasn't that so funny this morning? Those are things that help bond you together as a class. And you want your students to bond. You want them to have those shared memories. You want them to have shared happy memories. And you want them to have things that you all engage in, that creates that sense of community and of a class identity. Maybe you start Monday morning with a joke and students know they can start submitting jokes to you and you'll just choose from them, and doesn't mean that everyone gets a turn. It's just, I'm just going to pick one that really strikes my fancy. So you never know when it might be the joke that you submitted. Our traditions can be of varying shapes and sizes. Some of them might be simple little things and other things are larger and more well planned. When we speak to students about how we are as a class and who we are as a class, we need to talk to them like it is a done deal. When I talk to students about being a reader or being a writer, I'll say, well, as readers, we do this. As writers, we do this. As scientists, this is what we do. It's an assumption. I go in knowing that I am assuming they're already a reader, that you're already a writer, that you're already a scientist, and maybe you don't have all the skills yet, but you already are because you can think like that. Before you know it, kids are just nodding along because it's assumed. It's never a question. Are you a writer? Are you a reader? Are you a scientist? We're not asking. We're telling them. In this class, we're readers. In this class, we're writers. But we're just saying in a way that is not signaling anybody out. It's just the whole group, the whole class. This is who we are. This is our identity. When we talk about students about behaviors, if somebody oversteps or there was an incident in the classroom that maybe was tearing somebody down a little, you can say, oh, I think we've forgotten. Remember, as a class, this is who we are. We're kind and generous. And so how can we reframe that to make that more positive? How can we change that? Or simply apologizing and finding a better way to move forward. If we start talking to students that way and making that grand assumption, they start to think of themselves that way. So the next piece we need to talk about is, how long does it really take to train your students? Honestly, it takes a full month. It isn't a week. It isn't 2 weeks. It is a full month. You may not train them as intensively in the last 2 weeks as you do in the first 2 weeks, but you are still training. And we're going to continue to remind students of all of these things all the time, once a week, once every couple of weeks throughout the school year. And then every time we come back from a break, we're going to make sure that we're reinforcing them all over again. When students have a week off or a couple weeks off, they can get out of the habits that we've trained them in. What happens at home is different. And so they need to remind them that at school, we are these people. This is who we are. And that is an important piece that sometimes we forget. We just assume, everyone's trained, we're coming back, we're just going to jump right in. Take some couple of minutes and really retrain them and remind them of who you are as a class, remind them what your expectations are, remind them of your systems, because if we don't, then you start running into problems. Just head it off at the pass. The last piece is you need to have ways to stay on top of your workload so that you can still have a personal life, so you can have time for self-care outside of school. If you don't, you will wear yourself out. Teaching school is a marathon, not a sprint. But unfortunately, so often we treat it like it's a sprint. Oh, getting through the first week, getting through the first month, getting through the first quarter. We're trying to sprint to the end of the school year in the last quarter. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon. We have to pace ourselves and live our best life every single day. And that means we need systems for grading, planning. We need systems for how we're going to start our school day before the kids walk in the door, for getting all of our materials ready and how we're going to store them and access them in an organized fashion so that we're not scrambling in the middle of the day. We need a system for how we're going to shut our day down once the students leave. What time will you leave? When are you going to be done? How are you going to handle all of those pieces? I talk about this a lot, I know, but it's really an important piece to getting yourselves out the door and letting work go and not bringing home that huge bag of work that you may or may not do when you get home. It's better to have a system for getting it done on a regular basis. So for me, I stay late 1 day a week to do all my grading and planning. For some people, it's 2 days a week. You're going to stay and do it then. If you have little kids at home and you can't do that, you can get a babysitter. You can trade babysitting with another teacher if you want it. Or you can have 1 day or 2 days a week when you take work home and you're going to get it all done. 1 day for planning, 1 day for grading. Or 1 day for planning and grading, and you'll have that one late night, but then that's it. You're not going to do any other work the rest of the week, except for maybe a couple little things right after school, wrap things up, get the email wrapped up, all of those pieces. I have a workday shutdown routine, just like I have a workday startup routine. Those are pieces that I think are really important. My workday startup routine gets me in the right mindset. It gets me prepared for the day. It is my routine to check and make sure that I have everything that I need and I know right where everything is. My workday shutdown routine is making sure the classroom is set up, ready to go first thing in the morning, and I have everything that I need already prepared and ready to go. It also means that I am shutting down my email. I am cleaning it all up so I can start fresh the next day. I like a zero inbox as much as I possibly reasonably can. You'll have to decide how realistic that is for you. But all of those pieces of when are you checking email? I check email first thing in the morning. I take a couple minutes to check it right around the middle of the day. And then I deal with my email at the end of the school day, unless there's something urgent earlier in the day. But I'm not checking email all day long. I'm simply not. And I don't think you should be either. I know most teachers don't, but if you are that person, let it go. It's ruining your productivity and it's distracting you. Have those times of day when you're going to check your email, and then have a time of day when you're going to deal with your email. And that means clean out your email, deal with everything that has come in so that you can start fresh again the next day. And maybe you do that first thing in the morning instead of at the end of the day, whatever works for you. But for me, I like to wrap things up at the end of the day, deal with it all, and then I can move on the next day and start fresh. It's kind of like having dishes in the sink for me. I can't stand to have dishes in the sink at night because when I get up in the morning, I feel like I'm already behind, and yesterday's problems are bleeding into today, and that to me is the worst feeling ever. So whatever works for you, but have a routine for that so that your email gets dealt with and you don't feel like you're always, I have to get to that. Oh, I forgot about that. You want to have a routine for it so that you regularly are dealing with that email and then you can move on because email's here to stay. It just is. So find a way that you're going to regularly deal with it. And the last piece is you need to know what time are you coming in the morning and what time are you leaving every day. And you may have different times on different days that you're leaving, but you need to have a set time, set an alarm, and do it. Stick to it because if you don't, I don't know about you, but you could just go on and on and on. At some point, it's good enough and you have to move on and have a personal life. You deserve it. It is a marathon, not a sprint. Go home and take care of you. So that's it, my teacher friends. We're out of time and I'm out of breath. Thanks so much for joining me today. If you liked today's episode, I'd love it if you'd go to Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen and leave a review. And while you're there, hit the subscribe button so you'll never miss an episode. Also, you can continue the conversation with me online in my Facebook group, the Teach Joyfully Podcast Community, where elementary teachers can connect, get help, and encouragement for all kinds of education and parenting topics. You can find the show notes and links to all the resources mentioned in today's episode on my website at www.hopeineducation.com/podcast. And don't worry, I'm going to throw some extra resources in there for you so you can help plan all these pieces, because I want you to have your best year ever. And remember, a happy teacher is a good teacher. So until next time, teach joyfully and take care of you.